Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
That's great to be here.
So today we are going straight to the core. I mean, the really big questions, the kind of stuff you think about at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep.
The ultimate question.
Exactly. Does God exist?
Hmm.
If so, why do so many smart people become atheists? And, the biggest one of all, when it's all over, when the lights go out. Is that it?
Yeah.
Or something else waiting?
It is the ultimate cliffhanger. And honestly, it's the one thing that every single person, no matter their background, eventually has to think about.
It is. And to guide us, we're diving into a really heavy-hitting source. It's called The Destiny of the Soul, A Critical History of the Doctrine of a Future Life by William Rounceville Alger, published way back in 1880.
And that date is so important,
Right.
1880. That's right in the middle of the whole post-Darwin scientific explosion.
Right.
So you have traditional religion kind of on its back foot, science is on the rise, and Alger just steps right into that whole debate.
And we should be really clear from the start, this is not a sermon. It's not a religious book, really. Alger called it a critical history. He's trying to look at how all of humanity has wrestled with this one idea. Immortality versus just annihilation.
Right. And for our deep dive today, we're going to focus on the tension he identifies between two main camps. On one side, you have what he calls the atheistic naturalist.
The idea that death is the end, full stop.
Full stop. And on the other side, what he calls the rational Christian view, which is less about dogma and more about this idea of sort of universal progress.
But the really fascinating part, the twist, is that he says the two are connected. He basically argues that it's the fear of a cruel, tyrannical God that actually creates the modern atheist.
Exactly. It completely flips the script. We usually assume people become atheists because of science or maybe a lack of evidence. But Alger says, no, hold on. For a lot of people, it's a moral protest. They're not rejecting a creator. They're rejecting a monster.
Okay, let's start with the darkest part first then. The case for annihilation. Alger describes the atheistic naturalist's creed, and wow, the imagery is intense.
Oh, he does not hold back. He really wants you to feel the weight of this worldview. He describes fate as, and I'm quoting here, an iron skeleton seated at the summit of the world on a throne of fresh growing grass and moldering skulls.
That is pretty metal. It's this picture of life as just this brief, accidental green flicker on top of a giant pile of death.
It is. The idea is that nature is just one big, magnificent mausoleum, a closed system. Life comes from dead matter, it exists for a while, and then it goes back to being dead matter. There's no way out.
And he lays out the arguments for this. The first one he calls the argument from appearance. Basically, just trust your eyes.
Right, the evidence of your senses. When you look at death, it looks final. It looks like total dissolution.
The candle goes out.
The candle goes out. Where did the flame go? Nowhere. It just stopped being. Or his other metaphor, the music stops when the heartstring breaks. The song isn't, floating around somewhere. The instrument broke. The phenomenon is over.
And that's the common sense hurdle, isn't it?
Yeah.
We see the body stop, and that leads right into the second big argument he talks about, the physiological argument.
Mm-hmm. The idea that the mind isn't some ghost in the machine.
It is the machine.
Yes.
Yeah.
The materialist claim is that the thinking man is the sum of his senses. If you damage the brain, you damage the mind. If you destroy the brain, well, the mind is gone. There's no soul to survive.
But this is where Alger pivots. He doesn't just present this and leave it there. He offers a rebuttal. And he uses this really clever analogy from his time, the cotton manufactory.
Yeah, this is such a great 19th century image. He says, look at a factory. You see the machines, the gears, the steam. You could say the factory is just the sum of its parts, but that definition completely misses the most important thing.
The oversight.
The oversight. The intelligence that designed it and that runs it.
He also uses the locomotive engineer analogy, which I think is a bit easier for us to grasp today.
It's a simple question, right? Does the engineer die just because the fire goes out in the engine? Of course not. The materialist, in his view, is confusing the vehicle with the driver.
So just because my car breaks down on the highway doesn't mean I cease to exist.
Exactly. But he admits the materialist view is powerful because it's based on what we can see and touch. It takes a leap of reason to believe in the invisible engineer.
And before we dig into why so many people would actually choose to believe that engineer is gone, which is a whole other thing, I just want to take a quick moment here. If you like my channel and you're enjoying this deep dive, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep these conversations going.
It really does.
So, okay, we have this pretty bleak picture of the iron skeleton, but Alger asks the key question. Why? Why do so many intelligent, sensitive people embrace that?
And his answer is so counterintuitive. He says it's not because they hate God, it's because they hate a very specific version of God.
The orthodox version of his time.
Yes. He says their disbelief is actually a moral protest against a tyrannical, vindictive God.
We're talking about the classic fire and brimstone hell.
The mythological hell, as he calls it. And it was all built on this one theological doctrine called infinite sin.
Okay, what's the logic there? The infinite sin argument.
The logic went something like this. God is an infinite being. Therefore, any sin against God, even a tiny one, is an infinite offense because of who you've offended.
And an infinite offense.
Deserves an infinite punishment, eternal torture.
And Alger's reaction to this is just, he demolishes it.
Completely. He says it's not just a moral outrage, it's a logical absurdity. Man is finite. We are small, limited creatures. Our acts are finite. You can't get an infinite result from a finite cause. That isn't justice, he says. It's monstrous.
And he gives these truly horrific examples of how preachers use this idea to terrorize people. There's one bit he quotes. It's about a preacher describing a little child in a red-hot oven.
It's so visceral. And the child is screaming, beating its head against the top of the oven, and the preacher is explaining this is God's justice. Alger's point is that this isn't a loving father. This is a monster, a Moloch.
And that's the connection to atheism.
Yeah.
He says that any compassionate person, anyone who loves their own children, looks at that picture of God and says,
If that's God, I'm out.
right, I want nothing to do with him.
They would rather believe in no God at all than in a cruel God. The silence of annihilation, that iron skeleton, actually feels like a relief compared to the red-hot oven.
So the atheist, in this view, is actually driven by a higher moral standard. They're rejecting injustice.
That's his big insight. He sees the atheist not as an enemy, but as someone who is reacting, understandably, against a terrible distortion of truth. They're fleeing a burning building.
So if your only choices are the iron skeleton or the red-hot oven, that's a terrible choice. But Alger says there's a third option.
The rational or liberal view. He tries to rebuild the idea of God from the ground up. He argues that if a God exists, that God must, by definition, be infinite love and perfect wisdom. If your theology leads to cruelty, your theology is wrong. Simple as that.
And he brings science into it, the argument from astronomy. I love this part because he uses science not to kill God, but to make God bigger.
It's all about perspective. The old oven theology was from a tiny geocentric world, Earth is the center, God is like a king sitting on a throne just upstairs, it's small, it's local.
And then the telescope comes along.
And suddenly we're in an astronomic universe. We're not the center of anything. We're an anthill in a vast cosmos. And Alger says the idea that the creator of billions of galaxies is personally obsessed with torturing one person on this anthill forever, it just becomes absurd.
Makes the old God seem so petty.
It makes him seem like a tribal chief, not the architect of the cosmos. Alger has this great line, to think the world is to be superior to the world, meaning our ability to even comprehend this scale connects us to its creator.
So for him, science and faith aren't at war.
Not at all. They're partners. He says the materialists, the chemists, and physiologists, they're just looking at the machinery, the engine. But the philosopher looks at the engine and sees the purpose, sees the driver. You need both.
Okay, so if we accept this rational view of a loving God in a vast universe,
Yeah.
what happens to hell? Because he doesn't just throw the idea out completely, does he?
No, not at all. He believes in consequence, actions matter, but he redefines hell entirely. It's not a place you go to, it's a state you are in.
The true hell.
The true hell. He says it's the spiritual discord within you. It's the condemnation you feel from your own higher nature when you act with cruelty or selfishness. You create your own hell.
And he gives 4 master keys to that hell. Ignorance, pride, falsehood, and hate.
And notice, all of those are internal. They aren't punishments inflicted from the outside. They are states of being. If you are filled with hate, you are in hell right now, wherever you are.
And this all leads to his idea of universal salvation, which must have been a really controversial idea back in 1880.
Oh, hugely. He was a universalist, which means he believed that ultimately all souls are destined for good. He absolutely rejects predestination, the idea that some people are just created for hell.
But it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card.
No, it's not a magic trick where you die and suddenly you're perfect. He sees it as a long, long process of education, of progression. The universe is a school, and some of us are very slow learners. We might have to endure that spiritual discord for a long time, but eventually the goal is for everyone to graduate.
It's a very hopeful, optimistic view.
It is. He calls it a noble and beautiful doctrine of God, one that's free from what he calls disfiguring terror. He's trying to build a faith that expands the human spirit instead of crushing it.
So, to recap the journey, we've gone from the iron skeleton of the atheist, which is a hopeless end,
To the red-hot oven of orthodoxy, which is a fearful end.
to this third path, this rational hope.
That's the whole arc. Alger is trying to rescue the idea of a future life from the very theologians who made it into a nightmare. He wants to make it safe for good, compassionate people to have hope again.
There's a beautiful phrase he uses. He calls us beggars of God.
Yes, beggars of God, guests in this infinite universe. And he asks a really simple question. Is it really likely that the infinite housekeeper would invite us into this amazing room, let us start to figure out how everything works, and then just blow out the candle as we're starting to see?
It's the argument from our own potential, really, that it would be such a waste.
Exactly. It's a trust in the fundamental goodness and order of the cosmos, rather than a contract signed in blood.
It really reframes the whole thing. It's not science versus religion. It's more like despair versus hope.
Or mechanism versus meaning. Does the machine exist for its own sake, or does it have a purpose?
Which I think brings us to the final, really provocative thought for everyone listening. It's a comparison he makes.
It's a powerful one. He says, look, if the atheistic naturalist is right, if that's the final truth, then the philosopher who sought wisdom, the saint who sacrificed everything, the idiot, the tyrant,
They all get the same ending.
the exact same fate. Dust, silence, total equality and nothingness. That's the iron skeleton. But if the rationalist is right, if this life is just the beginning, just the entryway to a much longer journey, well, that raises a pretty challenging question for all of us right now.
Are we living a life that's worthy of being eternal?
Exactly. If your consciousness, your character doesn't just end, then the person you are building right now is the person you're going to be with for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Is your current day of judgment just the life you're choosing to live, moment by moment?
That is definitely something to think about. A huge thank you to William Rounceville Alger for this text from 1880. And thank you all for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We'll see you on the next dive.